David, let's start with the story that I guess got a little bit of traction yesterday for everything wonderful that Christine Fréchette has managed to do, including better polling numbers. She got caught off guard yesterday, it would seem, in the National Assembly. Big points here for the Liberals on this. What'd you think?
Well, I think there are points there that were scored by the Liberals because it's also the accumulation of mistakes. I mean, there are two major mistakes made by Christine Fréchette in the span of 24 hours. The first one, she was very happy to announce that we were all going to get a break on our car registration, but she forgot to mention that there was already a scheduled tax hike on those very car registrations.
Oops.
And so, because before the provincial sales tax was reduced for car registration, and that stops this year. So it's going to be the regular rate. And now during the hearings for the budget adoption, so every minister, including the premier, has to go through this, where you get grilled by the opposition. André Fortin asked a apparently very simple question: what is Quebec's debt? And I got to tell you, there was these long pauses, and you can forgive. And I've been through this. You get grilled, and it's a usual ploy. The opposition tries to find these questions, that will put the premier or the minister. Remember a few years ago, François Legault didn't know what the average rent was for a family, for an average family. And that got a bit of traction, and that showed him to be a bit out of touch. And so it's a regular strategy by opposition. I got caught up in it once when I was environment minister.
David, can't you just say, when asked the question, well, my finance minister is here, I'm sure he can provide the answer?
Well, when in that particular case, the finance minister isn't behind, but that's where I was going. You're totally right. She has an army of advisors and staff behind her. And so I thought and one of her trademarks up until now, when she was minister and when she ran her campaign for the leadership, and since she's become premier, one of her core qualities was, she's always prepared, she's always calm, she's always very studious. And you're not necessarily expected. I didn't know what Quebec's total debt was. It's $259 billion, by the way. And so it's okay not to know, but the way she reacted, the long silences, she looked frazzled, she looked, very impatient. Instead of just turning around to her staff, and you get to learn this, and I guess she hasn't learned that yet. You just turn around and say, hold on a second, we'll find it for you, and if it takes too long, we'll get back to you. But there is something to be said about this one, I think, because when you prepare for these things, there are literally 10, 12 binders that are prepared. You study before. She's premier. She doesn't have time. But that's what her staff is for, to know where to find the answers and to know you might be grilled on things having to do with pretty much everything having to do with government. So it's not expected for the premier to know everything about everything. But it's the way you react that often is worse than not knowing. Right. And I think, this compounded with what happened about the registration tax, it's kind of, not the best 24, 36 hours for Christine Fréchette, definitely.
All right. Then, of course, there was that issue yesterday as well where a couple of ministers were asked, hey, in the event of a separation vote, how would you vote? I mean, that should have been controlled as well, right?
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So you get the sense... And that's a general, how should I say, a general sentiment in government. You see it less on the federal side, but it happens sometimes. But it is a fact, you don't have as much senior staff as you used to. The staff is much younger. The CEQ has been bleeding staff for the last 2 years. So the most experienced people have left.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the problem as well.
All right. I did want to just touch on this because I heard that this morning without much detail. What happened with Eric Duhem yesterday calling out her? What was that about?
Well, Eric Duhem, his style, him. He tries to have these, very controversial statements to get on the radar. So he's criticizing the CQ government for taxing businesses and then trying to buy them off with government grants, and he was highlighting the failures like Lion Electric, like Northvolt, like Nemaska Lithium. And then he said, after Legault and Fitzgibbon, now we're going to have, and I'll say it in French because the proper translation doesn't really give it justice. Then he said, the grants from Ma Tante Fréchette, which is a very, colloquial term, and a very,
is it derogatory?
Yeah, well, in the tone, everything's in the tone.
Okay.
And so, my auntie Fréchette.
Okay.
And so it's one thing because, in the past, and Duhem tried to say this in his defense when he was attacked by this, because what happened is that Martine Biron, the minister responsible for women's affairs, and other women ministers of the cabinet reacted and said, that's no way to talk to the Premier of Quebec. That's very diminutive and it's disrespectful. And because in the past you did have that expression for François Legault, you would call him Mon oncle François, and so that was acceptable. But it's not the same thing with a woman, and you don't necessarily talk like that about a premier of Quebec, especially when she's a woman, and it's different. There's different rules. Let's face it.
He would have known that, would he not, David?
He would have, and he knew what he was doing, and that's Duhem's style. He tries to be controversial because, what can I say? It's that the type of people that support him in the regions. Let's face it, it's a more male-oriented, conservative segment of the population, and so he is trying to be controversial. He's trying to be edgy, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But this is no way for him to ingratiate himself with the female electorate, definitely. And anybody who seriously, you don't talk to about a premier like that. You just don't, and that's the problem, with the political discourse. It may seem innocuous to some, but that's the slippery slope that leads to excess and really hateful speech. This is not the case, but it's disrespectful, and it has no place in the political discourse.
Yeah, and clearly, as you're saying, he should have known better.
Yes,
let me get to
and
the
he
last.
Does know better.
Yeah,
let me
get to the last thing. So, this whole story yesterday, Mark Carney, 50% plus one. We know what happened after that. Everyone in Quebec set their hair on fire. So, PSPP today, Paul St. Pierre Plamondon said this. I want you to take a listen and tell me what you think.
I think the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, is just doing her job as a Premier, saying that, of course, they are free to consult their population, and of course, they're a parliament free of making any laws that they deem fit for their objectives. So for Mark Carney to all of a sudden start saying that it's a bluff, it's dangerous, I think it's really out of line, and I'm not sure where that is heading, but let me make clear that in the case of Quebec, our laws are clear, the history of the two referendums are very clear. We are free to consult our population at any time, and there's no blackmail or any comment that will change that principle.
By the way, there was a vote, right, yesterday in the National Assembly to once again, I just reconfirm, if I can use that term, that that's in fact the case. So is this a matter of, I can't get in the news any other way, might as well hop on this?
Well, yeah, isn't it funny, though, that any time somebody from another province talks about Quebec, and, for example, Doug Ford will say, I'd like Quebec to stay in Canada. Paul St. Pierre Plamondon jumps all over that person and says, mind your own business. But in this case, it's okay for Paul St. Pierre Plamondon to weigh into what's going on in Alberta. Okay, just let's put that one in front first of all. Second of all, Paul St. Pierre Plamondon here again. I think he is so obsessed with his own referendum that he's forgetting that he's falling into this trap over and over again, because while he's talking about this, that's the headline. And quite honestly, this morning, this was not front page news anywhere in French media. It was there, what Mark Carney said, but it wasn't the first, second, or third news story of the day. So by keeping this alive, what is he saying to Quebecers? This is my obsession. What you Quebecers are telling me that, 70% of you are telling me this is not a priority at all, and I don't want to hear anything about it. I'd rather hear you talk about affordability, about healthcare, about housing. He is setting that aside, and he's wasting valuable time and energy trying to drum up something which is factually inaccurate, by the way. What his statement, what Mark Carney is doing and what Alberta is doing is completely different than what Quebec has done, by the way, in the past. It's two different ways of tackling the issue. And there is a Clarity Act. And the fact is that when you're divorcing, when you're proposing divorce, it's between two parties. And it's funny, there's the big problem with Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon's logic is while he says, Quebec has the right to decide its future, which is true, if you're going to dissolve a relationship, you also are going to have to talk to the other side. And the other side is going to have a say in how that relationship will evolve. And that's why, for example, the UK and Scotland actually have put forward a mechanism where actually both states actually have to come together and agree on the question before it's submitted to Scott. So there are different ways to tackling this. Danielle Smith shows a path. Quebec in the past has chosen another. There are other ways of looking at it. But the fact is what Mark Carney is doing is sending a clear message to Albertans about the question about a question, because what his fear is that people will say might vote for a referendum on secession, just to strengthen the negotiating, the bargaining power of Alberta with the federal government not even wanting to secede. So he's making sure about that. And what he's doing with Quebec, he's forcing Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon to stay obsessed on independence on the referendum, which weakens his case before Quebecers.
By the way, I just will point out, because I know Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, in having spoken to him before, will always cite something like, look at other places around the world. We're not the first ones to go through this, and says it can be done. And I went and did a quick check today. You mentioned the UK and Scotland, and you're right. It was both sides agreeing to a level at which it would have to pass, and that worked out fine. It has not been the same from what I saw, David, in any other place. Somewhere you have to get 50, somewhere you have to get 60, somewhere you have to, we're going to do it anyway. So to cite these and say that this is a standard is basically untrue.
It is untrue. And also, but it is a Quebec law. So, okay. So, fine. After, Lucien Bouchard's PQ government passed a law in response to the Clarity Act and is saying 50+1. But if the question is not clear, that's a problem. And Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is actually having a big problem right now, and it was in the media this morning. There's a big problem brewing with the First Nations in Quebec that are saying, okay, hold on, all the things you're saying about how you think Quebec has a right to do this, that, and the other thing, well, then this applies to First Nations as well, doesn't it? And so, and he doesn't have an answer for that.
Right, exactly. Which is, of course, something Danielle Smith doesn't have an answer to either, as it turns out.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
That's a big problem also.
Yeah.
But again, what is surreal in all of this, while Paul Saint-Pierre gets completely intertwined in all this and these questions that is so far away from Quebecers' day-to-day issues, that's why since the fall, the PQ and the Léger polling, just take the Léger polling, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon was at 39% last fall. He's barely at 30 right now. And he's still obsessed and talking about, the RCMP spying on him and talking about 50+1 majorities of a referendum that is not even on the books yet. There are valid questions that could be raised about all this. What is a valid result, and the question, what should the question be? But the thing is that right now, Quebecers need results on their core issues. And the more Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon digs this hole, the more it opens the way for either Christine Fréchette or Charles Milliard to be an alternative to address Quebecers' real concerns.
David, we leave it at that. I thank you. I appreciate it.
Demain.
The newest tracks. Let's go. New music. And the next big thing.
Always on the new music first.
Your first place to hear it all.
'Cause you gon' like it, love it, wanna play it twice. Playing now.
iHeart New Music. Your digital station for brand new drops, fresh finds, and tomorrow's bangers. Powered by North by Northeast Music Festival. Taking place June 10th to 14th across Toronto. iHeart New Music. Stream now, online, on your smart speaker, and preset on the free iHeartRadio app.